The admiral felt his chest tighten as the silhouette raised its weapon, the barrel long, the stance steady, and the weight of its presence unlike anything he had seen before. The soldiers shifted uneasily behind him, whispering questions, but none dared raise their voice too high. The woman with the rifle lowered her head to the scope again, her hands calm, but her eyes sharpened as though she had just recognized a rival who was not supposed to exist. The crack of the enemy shot tore through. The nightstone exploded inches from her shoulder, and the force of it rattled the soldiers in their positions. They ducked instinctively, the sound echoing louder than the storm of gunfire they had faced moments before. She did not flinch her breathing. Steady her finger, brushing the trigger, her own rifle answering with a roar. The bullet streaked across the dark horizon, but when the smoke cleared, the enemy figure still stood unmoved. The admiral clenched his fists, realizing this was not a nameless shooter hidden in the hills, but a sniper trained for this very purpose. Their target was not the squad. Their target was her. The soldiers exchanged worried glances, their fear growing not because of the wave of enemies pressing in, but because they knew the duel that had begun was beyond their ability to influence their survival, depended on her winning a contest where one mistake meant death. She shifted her position, sliding across the dirt, finding a new angle, her body moving with practiced fluidity, as though she had done this dance countless times. Her rifle steady, her eye locked through the glass. The admiral crouched near her, whispering that they needed to fall back, regroup, move away from the line of fire. But she only shook her head, her voice calm, telling him the shot was meant for her, and if they ran, it would only follow. Another crack from the hills, another explosion of earth, this one closer, splinters of stone slicing the air. The soldiers cursed, ducking lower into their positions. She exhaled slowly, her body still as stone. Her finger squeezed the trigger. Her rifle answered again, and for a breath it seemed she had struck true. But the figure on the ridge shifted, vanishing into the shadows like smoke, leaving only silence in its wake. The admiral cursed under his breath, his nerves stretched thin. Then the ground shook again, but not from the sniper. This time armored vehicles roared from the far side of the valley, their engines louder, their guns already firing. The soldiers scrambled under the onslaught, their positions shredded by bursts of fire. They shouted to one another, panic rising as they realized they were being pressed on two sides. The admiral barked orders, trying to steady them, but his voice was drowned by the thunder of guns and the fear clawing at their hearts. Through it all, she remained steady, her rifle turning from the sniper in the hills to the armored vehicles below. Her shots rang out one after another, each one precise, each one finding its mark. The first vehicle burst into flames, then the second, then a third. The soldiers rallied at the sight of her impossible accuracy, their courage rising with every explosion. Yet the admiral knew the duel above had only been delayed. Not finished, the rival sniper still out there waiting. Smoke and fire lit the battlefield, the air thick with ash and gunpowder. The soldiers pushed forward, firing into the wave of enemies, driving them back step by step. But even as they fought, the admiral kept glancing at the ridge, every shadow, every flicker of movement threatening to reveal the return of the figure who had nearly ended it all in a single shot. He feared the soldiers would not even see the bullet when it came. She adjusted, her scope scanning the ridge, her breath steady, her movements deliberate. The admiral finally asked who the rival was, who had the skill to match her shot for shot. Her silence answered louder than words, the truth pressing heavier with every heartbeat. That she knew exactly who waited on that ridge. Someone she had trained against. Someone she had thought lost, someone who had once stood on the same side, now a ghost turned into a weapon. And then it happened. The flash on the ridge, the crack tearing. Through the battlefield faster than thought she moved, in the same instant, her body twisting, the round striking inches from her face, ripping stone into shards. She landed flat in the dirt, rolling her rifle already up her finger, pulling the trigger. Before the echo had faded, the soldiers froze, watching the ridge as the ridge was silent again, the smoke drifting like a curtain over the rocks. The admiral stared into the haze, unable to breathe, his hand gripping the dirt as if it could steady the pounding in his chest. The soldiers whispered, asking if the rival was gone, if the last shot had ended it. But the woman said nothing. Her eyes fixed through the scope, her finger still hovering ready, because she knew the silence was not victory. It was only the pause before the final strike. Then the haze shifted, and there it was, a glint of glass catching the faintest sliver of moonlight. The rival had not fallen. The rival had moved closer unseen until that flicker betrayed them. Her breath slowed her heartbeat, counting the seconds, her body still as stone. Her mind remembering the lessons of years past, the exact rhythm the rival always followed. And in that rhythm, she saw what was about to happen, and she knew her chance would come. Only once. The rival fired the sound sharper, faster, closer than ever before. Stone shattered around her. The admiral shouted duck, but she did not duck. She rose, the recoil slamming into her shoulder. Her own shot fired in the same instant, the bullets crossing in the night, one tearing into the earth beside her, one streaking into the ridge above them. The smoke lifted just enough to show a figure falling at last, collapsing into the dust, with the rifle slipping from their grasp. The soldiers erupted into cheers, believing it was over, their voices echoing through the valley. But she did not celebrate. She remained still, her eyes fixed on the ridge, waiting because she knew better than anyone that rivals like this did not fall so easily. The admiral saw it in her face, and the chill that ran through him was worse than the storm of fire they had just survived. The cheer faded as the silence grew heavier again. Then from the ridge came a sound, not of retreat, not of death, but of laughter, low and bitter, rolling down the valley like thunder. The rival stood again, battered but alive, their figure outlined in the glow of burning vehicles. The woman lowered her scope at last, staring with her own eyes across the battlefield. The soldiers followed. Her gaze, their voices silenced when they saw the rival's face for the first time, a face none of them expected to see there. The admiral gasped, because the rival was no stranger, no nameless enemy. It was once a comrade from the same ranks, someone who had vanished years ago in a battle everyone thought had claimed them, someone who had been trained in the same deadly art, someone who had learned to shoot beside her, their skills forged together in the same fire, now turned against one another. On opposite sides of a war neither had chosen, but both could not escape. Her hand trembled for the first time, not from fear, but from memory. The moments of training, the laughter shared, the promises made long ago that they would never stand as enemies. And now here they were across a valley. Rifles raised, one life demanded by the other. The admiral looked at her as if demanding she explain. But she could not speak. The battlefield was the only truth left, and the rival was already raising their weapon again. The soldiers braced. The admiral shouted for cover, but she did not move for cover. She rose, fully exposing herself on the ridge line. Her rifle steady, her voice low enough only the admiral could hear, that this would end now, one way or another, because neither of them would ever retreat. Both had lived their lives by the same code, and only one could walk away. The admiral wanted to stop her, but the weight of her words held him still. The final shot rang out, splitting the night, the sound echoing so loud it seemed to stop time. The soldiers froze, unable to breathe, unable to see which bullet had found its mark. The smoke drifted slower, the silence deeper. The rivals staggered, once their rifle slipping from their hands. Their figure, collapsing at last into the dirt, this time with no laughter, no movement, no return. The valley held its breath as the truth settled across every face. She lowered her rifle at last, her body trembling now, the weight of the years pressing down, the rival gone not as an enemy, but as a shadow of the past, cut away forever. The admiral stepped forward, resting his hand on her shoulder, his voice quiet, saying it was over. But she did not answer, her eyes still fixed on the ridge as though waiting. For one more sign, waiting for proof that the past truly could be buried, waiting for the silence to mean peace at last, smoke billowed once more, the silence stretching like a wire ready to snap. The wind cut through the silence, carrying with it a sound too faint for most ears to catch, but her eyes sharpened like steel, her body shifting into stance. The rifle steady in her arms, the soldiers followed her gaze, but saw nothing more than the hills shimmering under the heavy sun. Yet the way she raised her weapon told them this was no drill, this was no exercise. Something lurked beyond their sight. Something real and dangerous enough to make her silence thunder louder than gunfire. The admiral narrowed his eyes, his instincts whispering that she had sensed what none of them could. He did not question her, not now. Instead, he raised his hand, ordering the men into quiet readiness. The chatter died instantly. Weapons clicked into hands. Breaths grew shallow, every soldier trying to pierce the horizon with their eyes. The admiral studied her carefully, noting how she stood not as one testing her skill, but as one who had already lived through what was coming, her posture alone enough to command belief. Then it came faint at first, like dust rising at the edges of the hills, followed by the low growl of engines, a convoy of hostile trucks emerging one after another, dark silhouettes against the fading light. The men stiffened there, disbelief turning to alarm. They had come for a training day, not a battle yet. Here it was rolling toward them in waves of steel and firepower. The admiral barked orders, forming the soldiers into defensive lines, but even he knew they were not prepared for this. She dropped to her stomach, her rifle sliding into position, her breathing steady as the targets multiplied across the horizon. One shot, one kill. Each time the Barrett roared, another vehicle screeched to a halt. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, but her focus never wavered. The soldiers behind her could hardly believe it. She was striking engines, tires, gunners, each shot timed to break their momentum, yet the convoy kept advancing, relentless and growing louder with every passing second. The admiral shouted for artillery support, but the base had no time to answer. They were too far from backup, too isolated to rely on anything but themselves. Panic crept into the younger soldiers, their eyes darting between the approaching trucks and the woman who lay unmoving in the dirt, her hands working the rifle with precision like a predator striking prey. They wanted to believe she could hold the line, but even they knew 6 bullets, 6 targets, flawless or not, could not stop an army. Then she spoke for the first time since the shots, her voice low but commanding. She told them to hold position, not to waste their ammunition. She told them she would break the first wave herself. The admiral heard her words, and though logic screamed at him to resist, something in her tone made him obey. Something in her voice carried the weight of experience so heavy that it silenced doubt. Instantly, the soldiers tightened their grips on their rifles, their eyes locked on her as the convoy drew near. The first truck burst forward, its gunner firing wildly into the air, a roar echoing through the canyon. The soldiers ducked, but she did not flinch. Her scope fixed her, trigger squeezed, and the gunner fell before his body even hit the metal. The truck swerved, crashing against the rocks. The soldiers cheered, but she did not stop her movements. Fluid cold, unrelenting, each shot carving through the chaos, until the battlefield was littered with fire and twisted steel. But the horizon still rippled with more. The admiral realized then this was no accident, no random encounter. Someone had known their location, someone had planned this strike, and yet someone else had planned for her to be here to answer it. His eyes narrowed as he watched her every shot. His mind turning over the mystery of her presence. He had given her the rifle to test her, but it was clear now she had brought herself here for reasons none of them yet understood. Reasons that seemed tied to the battle unfolding. Soldiers began to rally, their fear tempered by her precision. They saw hope where minutes ago there had been none. They fired into the approaching wave, emboldened by the knowledge that she covered them with every breath, with every pull of the trigger. But deep down, They knew this was only the beginning, that the convoy was not the true enemy, but only the vanguard of something much larger and darker pressing in around them, and in that truth lay a question none dared to ask as the smoke rose from. The wreckage and the dust settled for a moment of uneasy silence. She lifted her eyes from the scope, her gaze distant and heavy, her lips tightening as if she had recognized something in the attack, something the others had missed. She lowered the rifle just slightly and whispered a single word under her breath, a word the Admiral caught, but none of the soldiers could hear. And that word alone was enough to chill the blood in his veins and leave the rest waiting. The Admiral stared at her, lips trying to grasp the weight of the word she had whispered. It was a name, a code name, not one spoken openly, but one carried through classified files buried deeper than most soldiers would ever see. His face stiffened as he realized who she truly was. The soldiers around him shifted nervously, unaware of what he had heard. They only saw his eyes narrow as if he had just uncovered a truth that was too heavy to share with the men who now depended on her. The trucks burned in the distance flames, reaching toward the darkening sky, their smoke rising like signals to something far greater beyond the horizon. The silence that followed was not the silence of victory, but the silence of waiting, as though the battlefield itself was holding its breath. The Admiral moved closer to her, his voice low, asking if she had known they would come, if this had been the reason she stepped forward with the rifle. Her eyes remained locked on the hills, her silence the only answer. Then the earth trembled, faint at first, like a heartbeat beneath the dirt, then stronger until the gravel beneath their boots shifted. The soldiers steadied themselves, glancing at one another in confusion, their nerves fraying as the sound of engines returned louder, deeper, heavier than before. The Admiral clenched his jaw as another wave of hostiles appeared. This time, armored vehicles bristling with mounted guns moving in formation like predators closing in on prey. The soldiers gripped their weapons, but doubt gnawed at them, their numbers too few. She raised the rifle again, her body calm, her breathing measured, as though she had expected this, as though she had seen this exact moment before in the shadows of missions no one else had survived. Her finger brushed the trigger. Her eyes narrowed into the scope. The Admiral barked orders for the soldiers to hold their fire until she broke the line. The young men and women obeyed, though their fear quivered beneath the surface. Her presence the only anchor keeping them rooted to the dirt. The first armored vehicle exploded in a bloom of fire, her shot piercing the weak point of its plating. The soldiers gasped, but she was already moving to the next, her rifle booming again and again like thunder in the still. Night, each round finding its mark, each target falling as though pulled down by the weight of inevitability. Yet even as she struck with precision, the line kept advancing. More armored vehicles appearing behind the first, their numbers swelling like a tide that could not be stopped. The Admiral felt the truth pressing on him like a storm. She could not hold them forever. Not even she could carry the fight alone. He raised his voice, rallying the soldiers to spread out to dig in to form a perimeter. Around the ridge, where they could at least force the enemy to funnel toward them, the men scrambled into position, their hands trembling, their breath shallow as they tried to steady their sights. But none of them could shake the image of her calm, steady figure in the dirt. The enemy returned fire, the crack of machine guns ripping through the air, bullets chewing through stone and earth. The soldiers ducked for cover, their hearts hammering in their chests, yet her body never flinched even as the dirt around her erupted in plumes, her focus unshaken, her eyes fixed on the advancing tide. She called out targets, guiding the soldiers with sharp, precise words. They obeyed instantly, their shots landing true not by skill alone, but by the rhythm she created in the chaos that surrounded them. The battle stretched into a blur of fire and thunder, the air thick with smoke, the night alive with violence and fear. The soldiers fought harder than they thought possible, emboldened by her unshakable Resolve, yet even as they gained ground, the Admiral could see the strain in her shoulders, the recoil bruising her skin, the heat warping the scope, the endless fire pushing the rifle to its limits. Still she pressed on, her silence broken only by the sound of the trigger, her will unyielding in the storm. And then came the moment that froze the blood in every soldier. The sound of a different weapon in the distance, deeper, sharper, more powerful than any mounted gun they had faced before. She lifted her head, her eyes scanning the hills, and then she saw it, a silhouette rising on the ridge, a massive figure holding a rifle as long as hers, but aimed directly at their position. Her breath slowed, her hand steady, as she whispered a single phrase, one that sent the Admiral cold in the marrow of his bones. The training range was alive with the sound of gunfire, brass shells bouncing across the gravel as soldiers took turns proving themselves under the watchful eyes of senior officers. The sun hung heavy over the base, casting long shadows across the lines of targets scattered across the field. Among the clamor, a single weapon stood out, resting against a crate, a massive Barrett. 50 caliber rifle, polished steel, glinting like a predator waiting to be unleashed. No one dared touch it without permission. And yet the Admiral himself reached for it. The gathered men and women fell silent as the Admiral lifted the rifle, his voice steady, yet carrying a note of challenge that rippled through the air. He said this was no ordinary weapon and no ordinary shot, that few alive could command such firepower. With grace and precision, his words were less about the weapon and more about testing the will of those before him. The soldiers shifted nervously, not wanting to be the one to fail before his eyes, their thoughts heavy with doubt and fear. Then she stepped forward, a figure the others barely noticed until now. Her uniform marked her as support staff, someone whose role was thought to be far from the violence of the range. Her presence drew quiet murmurs, disbelief in the air as she walked calmly toward the Admiral, her hands steady, her eyes sharp as glass. Though no one had ever seen her fire such a weapon before, the Admiral studied her silently, perhaps measuring her courage, or perhaps knowing something the others did not. Without a word, the Admiral placed the rifle in her hands. The massive weight would have crushed the confidence of any untrained soldier. But she balanced it with a grace that froze the whispers in the crowd. Her fingers slid across the stock as though reacquainting herself with an old friend, her breathing slow and controlled. She moved toward the firing line while the men exchanged doubtful glances. None could imagine what was about to unfold before them, and yet she carried herself as if she already knew. The targets waited, 6 steel silhouettes lined at varying distances, each one a test designed to break the focus of even experienced snipers. The soldiers watching knew the impossibility of striking them all without a single miss. Even the Admiral, who had placed the weapon in her hands, had not expected flawless results. Her boots pressed against the dirt, her eyes narrowed into the scope, her body still as stone. She inhaled deeply as the world around her seemed to fall away, leaving only the space between her and the targets. The crowd braced for failure, whispering that she was nothing more than a support officer who had overstepped her place. The sound of laughter broke quietly from the edges, disbelief mocking her resolve. The first trigger pull cut through the noise like thunder, the recoil snapping her shoulder. Back yet. Her stance unbroken, the bullet screamed across the air, and the first target fell with a resounding clang that echoed across the range. Silence followed the laughter, dying in stunned disbelief as smoke drifted from the barrel. But she did not stop. She adjusted her scope in a smooth, fluid motion like water finding its path. Her finger pressed again, and another shot rang out. The second target crumpled instantly. She exhaled softly, moving to the third, each pull of the trigger faster. Then the last? Her rhythm like a heartbeat, precise, unshakable. Each target dropped in perfect order until only one remained. The crowd frozen in awe, unable to believe what they had seen yet, none daring to speak as the final moment hung in the air, the Last target waited at the farthest edge of the field, its silhouette barely visible through the shimmer of the heat waves rippling above the ground. She steadied her breath, her finger curling around the trigger. The soldiers leaned forward, holding their breath. The admiral watched with a cold, unblinking gaze, the air thick with anticipation and fear of what would follow as the sound of the final shot exploded across the range, leaving everyone suspended in silence, waiting to see the impossible. Revealed before their eyes, the bullet tore across the range, splitting the silence like a blade through water. The steel target shuddered before collapsing into the dirt, the sound ringing louder than thunder, as if the earth itself had acknowledged the strike. The crowd erupted in gasps and disbelief, their eyes wide, their voices tangled between awe and fear. She lowered the rifle slowly, her face calm and unreadable, while the barrel smoked in her hands, leaving every soul around her caught in the shadow of what they had just witnessed. The admiral took a step forward, his boots crunching against gravel, his expression unreadable as his gaze fixed on her. He had handed her the rifle to test her will, not expecting to see perfection unfold before his eyes. Yet she had shattered every doubt with a flawless execution. He studied her silently as though searching for cracks in her armor, but there were none. She held the weapon like it had always belonged to her, leaving even the highest ranking officers unable to reconcile what they had just seen. The soldiers exchanged hushed words, their disbelief filling the air like static. None of them had expected her to step forward. None had imagined she could even shoulder the weapon much. Less master it, she was supposed to be nothing more than a support presence, someone working in the background, unseen, unheard. Yet now she stood in the open, a force none could ignore. Her silence spoke louder than their questions, but in the spaces between her stillness, they sensed a history too heavy to reveal just yet. The admiral broke the silence with a single order. He told her to reset the weapon and stand ready, his voice low but cutting through the murmurs like a command from another world. The soldiers looked to each other confused. Why would he test her further? Why would he demand more when she had already proved beyond any measure that her skill was unmatched? Her eyes flicked toward him, but she offered no resistance. She obeyed without hesitation, slipping another round into the chamber as the crowd leaned closer. Moments later, the admiral signaled for a new challenge. Targets were shifted and moved further out, painted in camouflage to blend into the terrain. The difficulty increased to a point where only the most seasoned snipers would have dared to take the shot. Whispers grew into quiet protests, some insisting it was unnecessary, others warning it was impossible. Yet the admiral stood resolute, his eyes never leaving her, as though he wanted her to face the weight of something larger than the range itself. She lay flat against the ground, her body aligned with the rifle, her cheek pressed against the stock, her breathing calm as a whisper. Her finger resting lightly against the trigger, she was not aiming for targets. She was aiming for memories, memories that stretched far beyond this base, memories etched into deserts and mountains, where silence was a weapon and shadows held death. The crowd could not see what she was reliving, but they could sense it in the steel of her gaze. The first shot rang out, striking a hidden target so well concealed that even the spotters had not marked it. The officers leaned forward, squinting through binoculars, muttering disbelief as the steel plate toppled with a metallic cry. The soldiers whispered her name, but it felt unfamiliar, as though it no longer belonged to the woman they thought they knew. Each shot that followed deepened the mystery she had become something else, someone else, a ghost from a war most could not even imagine. By the time the sixth hidden target fell, the range had gone silent, not from discipline but from awe. No one moved. No one breathed as the echo of the last shot drifted away into the sky. The admiral lowered his head ever so slightly, a gesture that carried more weight than words. It was not just acknowledgement, it was recognition and respect, the kind that was earned only by those who had walked through fire and returned with their soul intact, and yet her silence remained unbroken. The soldiers wanted to cheer, to shout, to demand answers, but the weight of the moment crushed every impulse. They could only stare at her as she rose to her feet, rifle resting. Across her shoulder, her expression unchanged, her eyes scanning the horizon as though the range was just another battlefield, another scar etched into her memory. The admiral stepped closer, his shadow falling over hers, his voice barely above a whisper, as he asked her one question and waited for her answer in silence. She did not answer. Not yet. Instead, she shifted her gaze toward the distant hills, her eyes narrowing, her posture tensing as though she had heard something no one else had. The soldiers followed her gaze but saw nothing. Only wind rustling through the grass, only the faint shimmer of heat rising from the earth, yet the way she gripped the rifle sent a chill through every